Alright, so we are back, of course, to talk about some Final Fantasy VII Remake, and what we have today is a smaller bit of info, but it's definitely worth discussing. We have a Japanese interview with some of the devs for Remake, talking about the technical side of things, using Unreal Engine 4 and things like that. So obviously, for that reason, we don't need to read over most of this, but there's a couple of things that stand out that were interesting, and also you get some behind-the-scenes images of them creating the characters and some of the other stuff. I thought that was really cool. Definitely worth checking out for that alone, just to see some of the behind-the-scenes character assets and them developing the game. But there's also a second page that shows you even more stuff to this, so I'll have a link below. I definitely recommend checking it out. So some of the standout quotes from this are them having to completely rewrite the drawing area within Unreal Engine 4, including the lighting and post-process, which is very different from the standard Unreal Engine, obviously. Another standout quote amongst all the game development jargon was Naoki Hamaguchi saying that there were no major problems during the development of the game, which I think is interesting because I don't really seek out game development information and things like that. It's not really what we're here to cover. We're mostly wanting to cover actual news for the game. We're not necessarily out here seeking out information about the behind-the-scenes stuff. We just want to know, when is Part 2 and things coming out. But it's nice to know that they decided to use Unreal Engine 4 for Remake instead of something like the Luminous engine, which I believe is their own engine. I think it's what they use for 15, which I think has a lot of problems. But they decided to use Unreal Engine 4 for Remake, and I believe also Kingdom Hearts 3. And at least according to Hamaguchi, there were no major setbacks or problems when using Unreal Engine 4, other than, I guess, them bringing development in-house, which kind of slowed things down because CyberConnect 2 was doing terribly or not doing it fast enough. I don't know exactly what happened there. And the point of why we're even looking at this quote is that if they're able to use Unreal Engine 4 just fine when making Remake, that's good for the future. That means, when making Part 2 and beyond, if there is even a beyond, it could just be 2 games. We don't even know. It's something we're going to kind of talk about here in this video, that there shouldn't be any major setbacks. They should be able to kind of, for the most part, make the game in the time that they want to. Now, going forward with Part 2 and beyond, are they going to be using Unreal Engine 4 still? Are they going to move on to Unreal Engine 5? How different are the two? Obviously, 5 is going to be better than 4, but in terms of game development, how different is it? They have to relearn a lot of new shit. Also, when it comes to Part 2, is going to be PS4, PS5, is it going to be PS5 exclusive, etc., etc. There's a lot of questions here, and a lot of things that go into game development, because if they got to make it for, last gen, and what is the new gen, but also technically current gen, they got to build for different generations of consoles, it's going to affect the game development, so on and so forth. But this right here was the major standout quote from this that people were latching on to from Hamaguchi. We're just going to read over it really quickly. I think that the character design by Tetsuya Nomura, which was a Japanese animation style, was successfully reproduced in the PBR graphics. It was a fun development to polish up while there was a conflict between PBR and the loophole. This time the stage was Midgar, so it was still wide enough, but I drew a part of the world of FF7. Next, I will finally draw the whole world of FF7. It will surprise users. I'd like to continue to do so. So this obviously got people talking because Hamaguchi, who is co-director on Remake, by the way, is saying that with the next game he's going to get to design and create the whole world of FF7, as in the whole world of Gaia, which has a lot of people questioning, how much are we going to be able to do in Part 2? Are we going to be able to explore the whole world? It is definitely an interesting quote. It's hard to say, though. We can't really speculate. We have our ideas. A lot of us think that Part 2 is going to be either have an overworld of some sort, or there will be an open world to explore. But for them to be able to squeeze in the rest of the Final Fantasy VII story, or at least the world of Gaia, into just the next game alone, I just don't know. And even if they do, even if they design the entire world of Gaia when it comes to Part 2, that doesn't necessarily mean we're going to get to explore the entire world. A small example I can give of what I'm kind of talking about is when it came to Remake Part 1, we actually got to see Nibelheim, right? From Child Cloud's POV perspective, him walking around Nibelheim, which means that when it came to Part 1, they had to design Nibelheim, but we didn't get to go there and explore, right? It's in the game, they probably have, if you go into the game files, some sort of 3D render of Nibelheim, but again, we didn't get to go there in the game. So even with Part 2, if they were to design the entire world of Gaia, we might still only go up to something like Nibelheim, and that's where Part 2 ends at, right? They might still have, 3D assets and renders and things like that of Rocket Town, Icicle Inn, Northern Cave and shit, but we just probably aren't going to get to go there yet. But it is still promising that if they are designing the entire world of Gaia for Part 2, if they're making or creating the entire world, that there's hopefully a lot of content for at least the next game. And jumping back to something I mentioned earlier about there possibly only being 2 parts, it's something we've seen in the past with market analysts or somebody talking about Square Enix not being able to afford to make more than 2 games or something along those lines. I don't remember exactly the details of it, but that's something we've heard in the past about there possibly only being 2 games, and this is not necessarily evidence for that, but if they're making the whole world for, the next game, then there's a little bit of something there that there could only be 2 games, potentially. I don't think they're going to go that route, because if they're going to do Part 2 to the scale that they're going to do, that they did Part 1, rather, then I don't know how you fit the rest of the FF7 story in there. At least comparatively to the original game's FF7 story, right? Because the Midgar segment is just a small fraction of the story. There's so much more after that. And if you're going to squeeze the rest of the FF7 story into one game, I just, man, it's got to be multiple discs or something if they're going to do that. But again, I don't think they're going to go that route. I don't expect there's many people out there that think there's only going to be 2 games. I think most of us are in agreement that there's a minimum of 3 and possibly 10. But as dudes, that is pretty much the video. What are your thoughts on this? What do you think they're going to do with part 2? Okay, we've talked about this before in the past, but it's been a while. Like, how far into the story do you think we're going to get with part 2? Do you think it's Nibelheim? Do you think it's sometime before then? Do you think it's sometime after that? Some people think it's going to go up to the point of a certain character's death. That is a possibility. I just don't know that they're going to go that far into the story, but they might. Other than dudes, that is the video. Hopefully you enjoyed. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you guys aren't new. We'll say more Final Fantasy VII Remake content. Turn on notifications. Follow me on Twitter at dashingdavidYT. And my Discord. Links to my social networks are in the description and in the outro. Later, guys.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Low Gain or leave it like Cobain.